The apostles said to Jesus, "Increase our faith." Jesus answered, "If you had faith the size of a mustard seed, you could say to this mulberry tree, 'Uproot yourself and plant yourself in the sea,' and it would obey you. If one of you had hired help plowing a field or herding sheep, and they came in from the fields, would you say to them, 'Come and sit at my table'? Wouldn't you say instead, 'Prepare my supper, put on your apron, and wait on me while I eat and drink. You can eat and drink afterward'? Would you be grateful to the workers who were just doing their job? It's the same with you who hear me. When you have done all that you have been commanded to do, say, 'We are simple workers. We have done no more than our duty.'"
All right. I had a nice long 5-6 page sermon, and it seemed to be a little redundant in places, so I'm going to try and keep this simple with 3 pages plus a little sum. It takes about 3.5 minutes per page, so relatively short today. All right. One of the first jobs I worked was in painting houses. It was the summer going into my senior year of high school, and I worked with my grandfather, his brothers, and one of my uncles. You could easily say it was the family business. Now, they worked in paint contracting virtually their entire working lives, and it showed. They could look at a room or a house and guess to the gallon how much paint and supplies they were going to need. They were fast in all the phases of doing a painting job. And that summer I came on and we all worked one big job together, which is great if you want to hang out with your family, I must say. My granddad got me going painting a door, as I remember. He gave me his brush and his bucket, and he said, "Go like this." And so I started. And when he came back, he said, "You're going too slow. You have to go faster. The paint is going to set before you finish." I didn't know. I just went like he said. So when I finally finished, I took my bucket outside to the water hose and tried to wash it out. Only I got that wrong too. Might have shared with you before. I was using water to clean up an oil-based paint. That's a no-no. I'm not sure people still use oil-based paint, but we did it that time. So big oops and uh-oh. And they got a good laugh out of that. Now, I remember wishing I had the skill set right away to be a good painter. And if my dad's side of the family was doing it, then I reasoned that it was literally in my blood, or at least it seemed like I should have a head start in mastering that skill. But that took time and effort and experience, and eventually I got it down though. Well, those first few followers of Jesus had a similar wish as well. Now, our ancient witness this week comes from the Gospel according to Luke, and Jesus is in the midst of teaching his followers about the life he has in mind for them. It's a generous, just, and compassionate life. And you know, it must have been exhausting for these disciples having to keep up with Jesus. As they travel from town to town throughout the countryside, they always seem to be a step behind Jesus. Not only that, but the longer they follow him, the more difficult it seems to get for them. And they get frustrated from time to time, as I did. Now, Jesus in this scene has just cautioned them to be mindful of how their actions can affect others. And then he tells them that they should be forgiving people until they lose count, which is a daunting task, by the way, to forgive every single time. So it's no wonder they throw up their hands in desperation and beg Jesus to increase their faith. Now, for them, gigantic deeds like giving up possessions and forgiving continually come from a place of a gigantic faith. That's the way Jesus was, and they think that if Jesus gives them a bigger, stronger faith, they'll have enough faith to master that skill of always acting justly, with compassion, and with forgiveness. And Jesus says, try not to think of it that way. He says, it's not a matter of a lack of faith. The issue lies in how faith is understood. Instead, think of it like a seed. Seeds have to transform out of their current form in order to develop into plants. And everything the plant needs to take root and grow is contained inside that seed. A little sunlight, a little water, and some tender, loving care, and the seed will release the fullness of what is contained within. So for Jesus, it's not the size of the seed that matters, it's the potential of the life within the seed. That's what makes the difference. And it's about the openness that comes from having even just a little faith, the tiniest amount of faith, in fact. So it's about having faith and then seeking to understand that faith. That's why we ask the questions. And that's what he was trying to get the disciples to do. In other words, we seek to understand what we believe about God and how we as individuals in a community are to live in light of that understanding, in light of that faith. For instance, this week's ancient witness comes from the Gospel according to Luke. It's not the only Gospel. There are 4 different accounts of the good news of Jesus, each telling the story of Jesus in their own way. This summer it's been Luke and a little bit of John, 2 different ways of telling the story, one using journey, one using metaphor. And it's best not to think of these stories as hard truths, but stories told as each storyteller remembered it to happen. Maybe with a little embellishment sprinkled here and there for dramatic effect, each being like a window into possibility. Sometimes they talk about miracles, like the one about Jesus reaching up to heaven and then 5,000 loaves somehow magically appeared in order to feed a crowd of 10,000. Did it really happen that way? Am I supposed to believe that it really happened that way? I don't know. I wasn't there. I like to believe it was something like that. I mean, maybe when Jesus asked God to provide an abundance of bread, I'm just thinking out loud here, 5,000 people had compassion for the situation, and in a moment of generosity, decided to share what they had with others. Might have happened that way. So the point of that story is to be skeptical, is to ask the questions, how did that happen? And what came from that? To be open to the possibility that abundance can come from scarcity. And the point of this story is to be open to the idea that something can be made from virtually nothing. Something very big, in fact, can come from something as tiny as the tiniest thing you can think of. And for the original followers of Jesus, that was a mustard seed. Something very tiny, only 1 to 2 millimeters in diameter. Yet, they have so much potential. These seeds, these mustard seeds, needing only 10 days to germinate, they can grow into a mature shrub. A tiny amount goes a long way. Jesus says, imagine being open to the idea that something so small as a single act of sharing or reaching out to help a friend in their time of need can have a gigantic impact on the lives of people in the community. We are created in the image of God, and God is a generous and loving being. And when Jesus asks us to love one another, then in a very deep sense, he's asking us to do the most natural thing we can do, being children of a loving God. It's about what it means to be human. It's about being who we truly are at our core, the seed we came from. It's about leaning into love and sharing that love with others. And that's what faith is about. Faith leads us out into the place where we are more aware of our need, our lack, and our dependence on God. UCC Reverend Cheryl Lindsay says it is only in that fragile state, that state of lack and need and dependence, that we will discover the one who can move mountains, who can plant a mulberry bush in a sea. So faith then is not something that we can have more of. It's not something that we possess, but something that possesses us. It beckons us forward into the life of love that God invites us into. It's a life that can only be achieved through relationships with this holy, loving, generous God. A little faith can go a long way. A little faith can indeed accomplish a great deal. In closing, I'll say the disciples that Jesus gathered were certainly not experts at the way of Jesus, his particular way of love. They weren't experts when they started down this road. They weren't masters of this way. But neither were we when we started. The impact of their ministry was immeasurable. We are here today because of them. So can our ministry be immeasurable. All it takes is a speck of faith. Just a tiny inkling, in fact. Thanks be to God. Amen.